Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Li Jianhuan. Welcome to the program, Our Top Stories. Hamas proposes a new ceasefire plan for Gaza, but Israel says it's based on unrealistic demand. A long-awaited European Union aid ship arrives off the coast of Gaza, bringing 200 tons of food aid that's urgently needed. Shoring up support for Ukraine and getting Franco-German relations back on track. President Macron and Chancellor Scholz meet in Berlin. And unwrapping bitter news concerns chocolate prices around the world will soar on the back of rising costs of cocoa beans. Where Hamas has presented the new ceasefire plan for Gaza. The multi-step plan would first see the release of some Israelis held in Gaza, including women, children, the elderly and sick, in return for the release of up to 1,000 Palestinians held in Israel. There are an estimated 134 hostages still in Gaza. The second stage of the plan proposes the release of all detainees from both sides. The final stage of Hamas's proposal would see Israel completely withdraw from Gaza and Palestinians return to their homes. With the war now in its 6th month, the United Nations has warned more than 500,000 people are on the brink of famine amid global pressure on Israel to allow more access to aid deliveries. Negotiators Egypt and Qatar are pushing for a lasting truce even after the last round of talks in Cairo failed. Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has warned against the dangers of an Israeli incursion into Rafah, the border town shared between Egypt and Gaza. An estimated 1.5 million Palestinians are seeking shelter in Rafah. And our correspondent Sarah Coates is in Jerusalem. Sarah, great to see you there. So how is this proposal different from the previous ones?
Hello. Well, when you put it next to these other proposals that have been put forward, it is broadly the same. A number of stages, captives released for a very large number of Palestinian prisoners, something that the Prime Minister is calling unrealistic. He was also, his office has just released a statement saying that Netanyahu has now approved plans for this operation down in the southern city of Rafah, where more than 1 million internally displaced Palestinians are sheltering, an area that was declared a safe zone up until quite recently. So this is certainly very, very concerning, given the pressure that the international community has really been putting on Israel to hold off on this. And this is, of course, something that we've heard from the US President Joe Biden that is a line for Washington. So certainly very, very concerning. But we do know that these negotiations are ongoing. The Security Cabinet is meeting a little later today. After that, an Israeli delegation will fly to Qatar to speak to these mediators about potentially ironing out some of the creases in this proposal. But certainly that main sticking point remains, and that is a ceasefire. Hamas says that this would be discussed in the first stage of the deal, but that is something that Israel has been very, very firmly against, saying that there will be no ceasefire until Hamas is defeated in the Gaza Strip.
Well, Sarah, before the delegation flies to Qatar, any comment from the Israeli Prime Minister or war cabinet yet?
We need to remember that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is under immense pressure internationally and also here at home. We heard those very scathing comments yesterday from the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. He said that Netanyahu is putting his own political survival above the interests of Israel, calling on him to step down, calling for elections to be held. He also said that Netanyahu is one of the 4 major obstacles to peace. And what we are seeing today are major demonstrations outside the military headquarters in Tel Aviv. The families of these 134 hostages that are being held in the Gaza Strip, they are demanding that the Prime Minister do everything he can and come to any kind of agreement now to get these captives out.
We know that there's a deal on the table, We know that this might be the last chance to bring back more than 70 hostages alive and to bring all the hostages that are already dead and bring them to bury them here in Israel. We know that there's a deal on the table, that Hamas gave an answer. We expect the Israeli government to do what it needs to do and close this deal and bring all the hostages back. That's money time.
And this comes as all the major television channels here in Israel have released findings of polls conducted over the last few days showing that elections, if they were being held today, that Netanyahu would lose to fellow War Cabinet member Benny Gantz.
Thanks, Sarah. That is our correspondent Sarah Coates in Jerusalem. A ceasefire deal is desperately needed as hundreds of thousands of people in Gaza face starvation. Jen Kopsteak reports.
A ship carrying 200 tons of food aid has been seen off the coast of Gaza. Its arrival is the first attempt to deliver much-needed supplies by sea through a new corridor. The ship started its 200-mile journey early on Tuesday, leaving Cyprus, where it was loaded with basic goods, including flour and rice. While the shipment will be helpful, it is not nearly enough to bridge the gap of a desperate situation in Gaza. A quarter of the population faces starvation, according to the United Nations, due to lack of food and increasing prices. The mission to deliver aid has been fraught with challenges. On Friday, Gaza's health ministry reported 21 Palestinians were killed while waiting for supplies at the Kuwaiti roundabout, while an Israeli airstrike on a distribution center killed 8 people.
We were giving diapers to people, flour, spaghetti and other things. Suddenly we saw missiles fired at us. Some young men were killed. Some people were wounded. This is not a rocket area or a place for resistance. Nothing is here.
The U.S. Air Force began airdrops this month, packed in Jordan and dropped into northern Gaza. Scenes from the air show the devastation on the ground. Aid agencies say the most efficient way to deliver large amounts of aid is by truck. The security of these deliveries has been an ongoing challenge. The World Food Programme says around 150 trucks are arriving every day, but that number has to be at least doubled to avoid an almost inevitable famine. Israel says it is successfully allowing 170 trucks through the Kerem Shalom crossing without violence, but issues remain on the distribution side. The U.S. said it is working on establishing a sea corridor which would provide 2 million meals a day alongside water and medicine.
Overland routes remain the most critical way to get assistance in and then to people who need it. But this will help close the gap.
On Friday, Australia announced it will once again provide funding to the UN's Relief Agency for Palestinians, immediately releasing almost $4 million after a 2-month pause. But the challenges remain as to how this critical aid will be distributed successfully to avoid a humanitarian disaster. Jen Kopsteak, CGTN.
Our correspondent Akram El-Satsri is now in Rafah. Akram, great to see you there. So how significant is it to have the aid ship arrive in Gaza now?
Well, given the very difficult situation the Gazans have been living in the Gaza North area, and given the very high rates of starvation among the general population in Gaza and the Gaza North, every single ship or every single food bag counts because it matters, it changes the life of the people, it saves the lives, and it helps people in this very critical time. In Gaza, the critical issue is all about the sender of that particular ship. It is the World Central Kitchen that is sending 200 tons of wheat flour, of rice, of legumes, and of also canned vegetables and proteins. This World Central Kitchen is present in Gaza South. It has a regular and steady supply of truckloads through Rafah border into the Gaza southern area, and it is providing community kitchens that help the Palestinians and provide them with daily meals. So it looks like this is a way to establish a regular community kitchen in the Gaza North to address some of the repercussions of the humanitarian crisis unfolding in the Gaza North. So, and it is also mentioned that it is a pilot project where they are assessing the possibility, assessing the safety factor, assessing the ability of the actors on the ground to receive the quantities that are sent and distribute them safely. So some of the challenges that are facing overland trucks are facing also this sea-prone ship. So they need to be worked out, and there should be some local actors receiving those and distributing them. So with this helping the Palestinians and addressing fraction of the need that is unfolding in the Gaza North, it needs thorough coordination and cooperation to make sure that the aid can be delivered to those who need it.
Well, Akram, how about the prospect for a ceasefire with Hamas's new proposal? How are Gazans that you have been talking to reacting to it?
Well, Gazans have been hoping they would see some ceasefire sometime soon. They would like to see also the Palestinian prisoners who have been in the Israeli jails for around 23 years, 25 years, some of them for 35 years now. They want them to be released, and they want also to come back to their homes. The ones who are staying in Rafah in the very south of the Gaza Strip and also in Gaza central area, the number is around 1.2 million. Gazans are also willing to come back to their homes, even if that means they're coming back to the bricks of their homes. However, with the Israeli Prime Minister calling that proposal that was made by Hamas as unrealistic proposal, like there is a very not optimistic atmosphere, pessimistic atmosphere about that, and the Gazans who have been suffering for the last time understand that the Israeli government has been providing some misleading statements about the real status of the negotiation over that. So no high expectations, but the Palestinians are hopeful that those negotiations would continue and a ceasefire would be reached, but not in the meantime and not in the near future, unfortunately.
Thanks, Akram. That is our correspondent, Akram El-Satri in Rafah. Now, voting is underway in Russia's presidential election. The latest poll suggests Vladimir Putin is likely to have another term in power. Ballots will be cast over 3 days, with the last polling stations closing on Sunday evening. 3 candidates are officially running against Putin, who has focused his campaign on fulfilling his goals in Ukraine. Now let's go live to our correspondent Dasha Cherneshova in Moscow. So Dasha, what's the mood among voters? Is Putin likely to have another term?
Well, that's the foregone conclusion that the incumbent president, Vladimir Putin, will be securing yet another term in office, and he will remain the president of Russia until 2030. To this moment, we understand that the turnout has exceeded 20%. The voting will be taking place for 3 days, so certainly the authorities have done their utmost to make sure that the turnout is high. It is the novelty that the election is taking place not just in or for 1 day, but for 3. And also the people are able to cast their ballot online. It is yet another novelty for the presidential election. When you talk to the people, when you see the people who are coming to the polling stations in Moscow, for instance, here, this one, they are all relatively positive, saying that they're exercising their civic right and civic duty to cast a ballot. And this is exactly what President Putin was saying in his address to Russians ahead of the presidential election, that it is important for voters to come to the polling stations or cast their vote online and to determine the course on which Russia has taken in terms of its development. We also understand that the vast majority understands that there is no viable candidate who could be challenging the ongoing course, at least at this moment. So the question for many is what happens after 2030. But anyway, judging by the public opinion polls that have been releasing their forecast, it is understood that the turnout will be reaching 70% and that 80% of those voters are expected to cast their ballot in favor of the incumbent president. This is seen for many here in Russia as preserving the continuity and stability inside the country. Obviously, the addresses that the Russian president has made before the election, for instance, the Federal Assembly address, as well as the interview that we have most recently seen on the state television channel was were both outlining the plan that the Russian president has for the country for the next 6 years, and that includes development of the infrastructure, a lot of national projects that are targeting the family, that are going to help people who are still in poverty. President Putin admitted himself that this number is too big for the country that is aiming to become the fourth largest economy in the world in terms of PPP in the coming time. It is the fifth now. So the understanding is indeed that the Russian president will be securing yet another term, but obviously it is seen as the step that will be helping to preserve the course that Russia has taken.
Thanks, Dasha. That is our correspondent, Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. China plays host to the Angolan leader with investment and cooperation on the agenda.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us.
And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
This is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. Hamas proposes a new ceasefire plan for Gaza, but Israel says it's based on unrealistic demands. And a long-awaited European Union aid ship arrives off the coast of Gaza, bringing 200 tons of food aid that's urgently needed. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has welcomed French President Emmanuel Macron for talks in Berlin. It comes ahead of a tripartite meeting with Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk to discuss support for Ukraine. Differences between Paris and Berlin over military aid to Kiev have deepened in recent weeks. NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg warned on Thursday that Ukraine is running out of Western-supplied ammunition. Our correspondent Trent Murray is in Berlin. Trent, what more do we know about the talks?
Well, we're being told that Ukraine will be front and centre of these discussions between the three leaders, and that is because Europe really is growing quite concerned about the shifting dynamics on the battlefield there. We know it is having to ration its ammunition now as supplies do start to dwindle. And given the political deadlock in Washington, of course, that major $60 billion defence package being held up on Capitol Hill, there is growing pressure on European countries to try and step up and provide more military aid for Kyiv. As I say, they say they are growing increasingly desperate. Now, we know that ammunition is really the main concern, but already there are some issues. The European Union, for example, has signalled it wanted to send 1 million shells to Ukraine by March, but it will miss that target by some 500,000. And it's those types of problems that we understand are being discussed right now in that building behind me there between those three leaders, because there is a real sense here that if something doesn't change soon in terms of weaponry supplies to Ukraine, then Russia could continue to make advances, particularly in the east of the country. And so we are expecting a press conference quite soon where we are awaiting some more details.
Well, Trent, we know that differences still remain in Western allies' approach to their support for Ukraine.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, particularly between Germany and France, of course, we see from President Macron some quite hawkish rhetoric, if you will. I mean, even discussing at one point the possibility of not ruling out putting French boots on the ground in Ukraine, an idea that was very quickly shot down by Chancellor Scholz here. He said it's a complete red line for him and no German forces would be in Ukraine. But German government officials will privately grumble, if you will, that while the French president talks quite tough on Ukraine, he doesn't necessarily match it in terms of military contributions. The latest estimates suggest that France has handed over around $700 million worth of military aid to Ukraine. That compares to Germany, who's handed closer to 19 billion. And so we expect those differences will be sort of part of the discussion today, particularly at the press conference. We also are wanting to hear some more around the possibility of German Taurus missiles being handed over. Again, Chancellor Scholz has been holding very firm on not providing those advanced long-range missiles, but that is a real contradiction to the French position. They've handed over a number of their own version, which is called the Storm Shadow.
Thanks, Trent. That is our correspondent Trent Murray in Berlin. China and Angola have boosted ties as Chinese President Xi Jinping met his Angolan counterpart João Lourenço in Beijing. Xi said China will encourage more investments in Angola and it supports African countries' own efforts to maintain regional peace and stability. Lourenço expressed his willingness to expand cooperation with China under the Belt and Road Initiative and reiterated his support for the One China principle. CGTN's Wang Yue has more from Beijing.
Yes, here in Beijing this afternoon, Chinese President Xi Jinping held a welcome ceremony for his Angolan counterpart, visiting President João Lourenço. And the two heads of state held talks and jointly attended a signing ceremony of cooperation documents in the fields of Belt and Road Initiative cooperation, trade and economy, agriculture and green development. And they announced to elevate the bilateral ties to a comprehensive strategic cooperative partnership. And President Xi Jinping stressed that the cooperation between China and Angola has a huge potential and a promising future. He said China is ready to work with Angola to implement key infrastructure projects and help Angola realize agricultural modernization, industrialization, and economic diversification. He also said that China will continue to implement programs such as dispatching medical teams to Angola and providing scholarships to Angolan students to enhance the people-to-people exchanges. President Xi also said the rise of developing countries is unstoppable and the global south should not be absent from global development and prosperity. He emphasized that China is a reliable friend and sincere partner of African countries. He said China supports African countries and the African Union in their efforts to resolve their own issues through their own means and safeguard regional peace and stability. In response, President João Lourenço said Angola-China relations have maintained high-level development. He noted that China was the first country to provide support to Angola when its civil war ended and when the country was struggling with the COVID-19 pandemic. The president said China's support has greatly promoted Angola's infrastructure construction and socioeconomic development, setting a good example of mutually beneficial cooperation.
French lawmakers have approved a bill that will impose penalties on ultra-fast fashion products. It calls for measures including an advertising ban and an added environmental charge for low-cost items. France says it will propose an EU ban on exports of second-hand clothes. Scientists in Australia have discovered fresh coral bleaching on the Great Barrier Reef. Researchers say a major bleaching event took place around 6 islands in the far north of the UNESCO heritage site. They say that despite the amount of bleaching, particularly in the shallow waters, the reef could still recover. UNESCO has added Berlin's popular techno clubbing scene to its cultural heritage list. It's been described as another milestone for the genre. The UNESCO Intangible Cultural List was established in 2003. It aims to assist and maintain cultural traditions like music, dance and art. Cocoa prices are sitting near record highs and chocolate makers are increasingly passing those costs along to consumers. And as Tony Waterman reports from Paris, some are already cutting back.
Making a French praline is meticulous. At Edouard Chocolatier, nearly every step of the process, from the pouring to the cutting to the nut sorting, is done by hand, taking up to 2 days. The final, some would argue most crucial step, a thorough drenching of Grand Cru chocolate.
I'm using a chocolate coming from New Guinea, and it has a really strange flavor, like a smoke or something coming from a barbecue, something overcooked.
Edouard sources the bulk of its chocolate from Southeast Asia and Latin America. But drought and disease, thousands of miles away in West Africa, where 70% of the world's cocoa is produced, is driving up prices across the board.
Large companies that source over there are going to look at different origins because they still need to produce their chocolates. So we feel the repercussion of this increase in every single origin that we source, whether it's Papua New Guinea, Venezuela, you name it, it has been increasing.
Edouard President Juliette Billet de Villemer says suppliers have increased prices 15% this month alone as cocoa prices sit near record highs.
This is now the second year in a row that prices have gone up. In 2023, the company absorbed the losses, but this year it's having to pass some of those costs along to consumers. This box of chocolate, for example, will now set you back $30, a little over $1 more than last year.
To save costs, some companies are slimming down on size while keeping prices the same. Others are adding cheaper alternatives like nuts or simply reworking their recipes to use less chocolate.
The quality of our product is so important to us, to our DNA, to our image, that we just could not resolve ourselves to change anything. And so we decided to increase a select number of products in our shop.
For now, the higher prices don't seem to be scaring away the most devout shoppers.
I'm traveling here from New York City. I'm noticing that the prices are higher than my last trip here.
Does it impact the way that you're shopping for chocolate?
Not really. I usually buy a ton of gifts, so hence my big bag.
Others, though, say they've been forced to cut back.
I'm actually buying less chocolates due to the price that has risen up, yeah.
I consume less chocolate than before because the price is getting higher and higher, but I'd like to choose the best ones.
And with experts expecting the cocoa crisis to extend into 2025, that chocolatey treat could become an increasingly strained tug of war between cravings and cash. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Paris, France.
Our headlines again. Hamas proposes a new ceasefire plan for Gaza, but Israel says it's based on unrealistic demands. A long-awaited European Union aid ship arrives off the coast of Gaza, bringing 200 tons of food aid that's urgently needed. And shoring up support for Ukraine and getting Franco-German relations back on track, President Macron and Chancellor Scholz meet in Berlin. And that is the World Today. Thanks for watching. There is more news on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We'll be back with more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next is World Insight. For now, from all the team in London, goodbye.